You are watching the Deadfoot Diver Podcast with Curt, the Deadfoot Diver.
Welcome to the Deadfoot Diver Podcast today, where we talk about everything diving, tech diving, and especially bring to light the benefits of diving with disabilities. I am absolutely thrilled on my first season to be able to have my next guest on. My next guest is considered a rock star in the diving world, if not the world period, when it comes to diving. She is a National Geographic explorer. If I actually sat here and had to list off all of her awards, it would take the entire episode and probably longer. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce world famous explorer Jill Heinerth. How's it going, Jill?
Hey, great. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Mhm.
I really appreciate this. It's an honor to have you on here. I have been a fan of your work and your diving for decades since I started diving, actually.
Awesome.
So it is a absolute treat to have you on here and supporting me in bringing the attention to disabled divers. So first of all, if you don't mind me asking, I know that you've had a lot of experience working with disabled divers.
Mhm.
So can you tell me about that?
Oh, I mean, honestly, we all have different disabilities and abilities, right? So for me, it's just an extension of the realization that scuba is personal. Like when it comes to fit for equipment and strategies for how to solve problems, there are lots of unique solutions that are right for somebody's different body proportions or someone's different level of abilities or flexibility or whatever. So when it comes to diving, I think that instruction and support and buddying is a personal thing. And so for me, it's really exciting to help people who have maybe more challenges than I do or unique challenges that just need to be overcome. Because once we're beneath the surface, it doesn't matter like what gender, what color, what political background, what, level of ability. We are all able to float, neutrally buoyant in paradise.
Yeah, that's true. So can you tell me about, I know that you've had a chance to actually work with some amazing
Mhm.
disabled divers who are
Yeah.
doing extreme technical diving way beyond probably what I will ever even attempt to do. So, can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, for me, it's exciting. It's a learning opportunity when someone's able to like authentically share the challenges that they expect that they'll have underwater. And what I've discovered is actually most of the challenges are just getting ready for the dive. Whether it's getting into a suit or whatever, needing some sort of assistance to get in the water. Once you're in the water, you're home free.
Yeah.
I've dived with people who are living with paraplegia, for instance, and yet they can outswim 90% of others I know, like with their arms. It's just unbelievable how they can propel themselves through the water. And so I think a lot of people who dive with disabilities or challenges in their life, they have to find ways around everything they do. And so it's just another expression of their creativity getting into the underwater world. But once they're beneath the surface, it's like they're free. It's all of a sudden the things that, gravity challenged them with are gone. And they're so humble and just enthralled with the opportunity to really be free again.
Yeah, it's amazing the effect that scuba has on somebody. I mean, I know for myself personally, it has getting back into diving again this time has changed my life beyond my wildest
Mm.
dreams.
Yeah, that's
Um,
cool.
it's been amazing. I went through years of depression,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of not great stuff when I wasn't diving, and
Mm-hmm.
I actually it was a snorkeling trip in Cozumel where I actually happened to meet an adaptive diver who they sat her on the boat beside me,
Yeah.
and it's like, I can do this. I
Yeah.
spent the entire time actually
Yeah.
watching her when I was snorkeling instead of paying attention to all the marine life because I was like, why did I ever give this up? I gotta at least try this again. So the next
Mhm.
day I actually got into the pool and threw a tank on.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a really important point too, that it's not just physical issues that sometimes like slow us down or make things more difficult, but it's also mental health issues. And thank God we're able to talk about that a lot more openly now. But you know, diving is incredibly powerful for mental health challenges too, like getting underwater and just getting out of your body and your mind in this incredible environment and sharing an experience with someone else is powerful. It's empowering for most people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I have had so much fun this year. I mean, doing this podcast has brought it to a whole nother level, just the
Cool.
people that I've met.
Yeah.
I've also been talking a lot with Jim Elliott from Dive Heart,
Yeah, great.
which I mean, his videos, I I actually have trouble going through them without crying.
Great. I know we all do.
Because I
Yeah.
totally, in my case, I totally identify with it. Uh,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
amazing the impact it does, not just mentally,
Yeah.
physically. I feel way better. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, when I was in Jamaica last month diving and I actually hurt my hand, I
Yeah.
felt way better when I was diving all week. If I had access to a recompression chamber, I would probably go right now.
Well, you know, that's really interesting because there's unbelievable, like, therapeutic, you know, benefits from the high partial pressures of oxygen. I mean, honestly, if hyperbaric treatment was cheaper and easier to deploy, it would be a mainstay of the medical system. You know, I recently met a guy in Europe who he had profound, you know, third degree burns on something like 40% of his body, and diving was his life too. And he was, you know, first A, trying to survive, but then B, thinking about, oh my God, how am I going to dive? And the doctor's like, you're going to be in the hospital for probably 6 months in ICU. And he's like, no, I'm leaving here in 6 weeks. And they're like, no, you're not. And he goes, yeah, I am. And 6 weeks, you know, to the day, he left and he started diving right away, dry suit and everything.
Wow.
And his burns healed incredibly well. And the doctor's like, what are you doing? He said, I'm diving. And he's like, oh crap. You know,
It's
okay, it seems to be working, you know,
It's
mentally,
funny
physically,
how a lot
everything.
of
Yeah.
doctors actually don't even, when they're thinking about treatments, don't even think about the benefits of hyperbaric medicine, like for burns or anything.
Well, you know, in other parts of the world, they do. Like in Bermuda, for instance, they have an amazing chamber facility, and they don't have diver traffic that needs it. So they do mostly, you know, medical treatments for people, spinal cord injuries, for burns, for gas gangrene, for diabetics, and they chart the progress over time, like day by day photos. They have the luxury because of the socialized medical system that they have that they could treat someone for a whole year. But imagine that if you're treating someone for a whole year, like 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day, that's an incredible investment of the medical system, and it's only going to happen in a nonprofit situation. So that's why we're not going to see that happening in the United States anytime soon. But the therapeutic benefits of hyperbaric medicine are far beyond diving. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible what hyperbaric medicine can do, and
Mhm.
like you said, just about the mental aspect of
Mhm.
diving in
Mhm.
general with somebody's overall health. I mean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I know that list reading your book here, Into the Planet. If you have
Yeah.
not picked up this book, you got to read it. The Audible book is absolutely incredible. I have actually
Thanks.
listened to it a couple of times.
Oh.
Authors, you need to read your own books.
That was hard, actually. That's a hard process for me, doing my own audiobook.
Really?
Yeah, because you have a director and an audio person who's working with you, and the director keeps stopping me, going, "No, don't improv. You need to read every word as you've written it." But when you start reading your own stories, you tend to improv here and there.
Yep.
She's like, "No, word for word."
Which is
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, your book is incredible. It's actually
Thanks.
the best book I have ever read about diving and
Oh,
exploration.
thank
It is
you.
truly inspirational.
Thanks.
Um, so divers out there, pick up the book if you haven't, because you're missing out. So in terms of some of the guys, I know that you've done some work with Hubert Crutchan,
Yeah, yeah.
who's actually he's the only really adaptive dive instructor anywhere in Canada.
Y-
He's totally swamped. He cannot even take any more students at all because he's
mhm,
so jammed.
mhm.
Can you tell me a bit about that and
Yeah.
about the type of stuff that he does?
Yeah. Hubert's a great friend of mine, and he's an excellent trainer. We first met when he was interning with me as a cave diving instructor, and then learning about his work, I started to just kind of be an on-call support buddy for some of his divers, and so he might call me and I'll run down to jump on a boat with him in Lake Ontario and go diving, but also he has, I guess, turned to me for some of the technical diving support for some of his students. So we've worked with divers with disabilities to train them as cave divers and Sidemount divers, and far
Which
beyond
is
single tank
incredible.
diving. Yeah. So yeah, we have a student that we worked with last summer or last winter under the ice that's now interested in Sidemount diving, and he's paraplegic, and so together we'll strategize to get it just right. And I love that challenge, because I I feel like it's so important to have a professional and personal fit, especially when it comes to side mount diving. And that is exacerbated when you have someone who is diving with additional challenges and needs adaptation to the equipment to make it work. And sometimes that can even involve getting a waiver from a training agency and saying, all right, I know you think that this is the minimum tank size that someone should wear. However, with this person who's only got really the use of half of their body, we need to go a little bit smaller with the tanks. And all that's going to do is shorten their range within a cave diving environment. So there's nothing wrong with someone diving closer to the entrance of the cave. They need the same skills because they're in the overhead environment, but they don't have to go to the back of the cave to be a cave diver. So I love helping to find those interesting solutions that are unique and work for one individual.
Which is incredible because I know I found this year when I started diving, like I tried down the pool in Cozumel, came back, got a refresher again. And it was actually through a friend of mine, Robin, at Bob's Dive Shop, where I originally got certified back in 1991. And so Robin said, all right, you know what? I'm going to make you do a full refresher. Okay, cool. So I did. I'm glad she did. But then the issue was when I went to go diving. So I go out, get all my dive gear. I go and get a dry suit and everything else. And luckily, I had a dive buddy who actually was a dive master who actually has been an unbelievable amount of help, just helping me adjust gear and figure out how to do stuff, because I literally had nobody adaptive that was doing this type of thing
Mm,
to turn to ask.
mm-hmm.
So I had to make up stuff on the fly. I can't count how many times I drove all the way up to Tobermory, get in there, and then it's like we do some testing, and then it's like, okay, well, we're not diving today, but I mean, at least at the tugs, I got to see a shipwreck.
Right. Yeah. For me, like, I started diving at a time when the gear wasn't female specific. And so that's kind of where my journey began. And it might sound trivial, but it's so important, because like when gear is just made for a man, then the shoulder straps are too wide. They fall off a woman's shoulders. Like, our necks are thinner. And so the dry suit seal that we pull over our head that just about takes the skin off our nose is still too big around our necks. Our bodies contour differently. Our weight is distributed. Our buoyancy is distributed differently. And everything changes. Like if you've got this like tight chest strap across a woman with big boobs, it's incredibly uncomfortable. So right from the beginning, I had to adapt the gear that I was given in order for it to work for me, especially when it came to tech diving. And still, we have a long way to go with women's gear. But so I was used to having to do that. And I've always said to people, there's not one solution. And then the other thing to remember is that survival doesn't necessarily have to be pretty. It doesn't have to follow this, rote technique that looks like perfect on YouTube, because that's not how emergencies go down. Like survival doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to be effective. You just have to know what to do and how to do it for you to get yourself out of a problem. And so there's not one way. And maybe I'm a bit of a pariah for that, but I think the whole scuba community could use a few lessons from adaptive scuba.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see how these guys adapt I'm really looking forward to seeing how these guys actually adapt their gear and
Yeah.
what they have to do to overcome their disability.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really want to meet this paraplegic who's doing the cave diving stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm super excited to actually go down and assist to dive with these guys, because they're gonna kick my butt to want to do better and do more stuff that I until now thought was not gonna happen.
Oh, one of my, best, friends that I've met through Hubert is a woman who's paraplegic, and she is an absolutely extraordinary diver, and she's intro to cave qualified. She'd be full cave qualified, except that there's just a couple of, hiccups in terms of checking the boxes for the general standards, but she's absolutely exceptional, and I love diving with her.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Deadfoot Diver. Subscribe and share. Your support means the world to me. If you'd like to contribute directly, you can do so at the link in the description at buymeacoffee.com/deadfootdiver. Every donation helps me work towards earning my adaptive dive buddy certification, travel costs to help me assist other adaptive divers, and covering further training and equipment costs, bringing you on even more exciting adventures. Don't forget to check out my guest links in the description. And remember, grab an adventure and live.
Which is incredible. So let's talk Sidemount for a bit. I mean, you do a lot of Sidemount diving with cave diving, obviously. I'm just starting to take up Sidemount. It was funny because when I first got back into diving again, there's a retired military guy that I happened to meet when I started buying gear, who's been helping me out. And he actually has worked with people with disabilities and stuff. And the first time I went over there, I said, you should think about doing Sidemount. And I'm like, Sidemount? That's full cave. Like, I'm not doing cave stuff.
Yeah. No, Sidemount makes so much sense, for redundancy, for carrying the gear out of the water, right? Yeah.
That's actually why I'm looking at it. And why I'm getting certified with it, mainly because of my legs and getting in and out of the water. Especially even on shore dives, like even at the tugs up at Tobermory, where I can get in, but generally I'll take a few steps, I'll go down on my knees and then sort of drag myself out to where the other guys are, because I just don't have the stability in my leg.
Right.
And wetsuit boots, as you know, provide no stability for a leg. And dry suit over boots, which I wear all the time, they actually do provide a bit. If there are any dry suit over boot manufacturers out there, and you have one that's got a thicker ankle in it with more support, please email me. But yeah, so what do you find what do you like most about when you're diving side mount?
Everything. I dove side mount before I dove back mounted doubles. So side mount was just so logical to me, especially in exploration, because getting a set of manifolded doubles lowered down, into a cenote on rope is like super dangerous and heavy, right? So side mount just always made sense for me. But I'm going to mention one thing before we leave your last comment. The combat boots that Converse makes, that they're like a high top running shoe, but extra high with a lot of ankle support. Get a size that's like 2 sizes larger than your normal foot. It makes a great dry suit boot that has stability. Really? Yeah. It doesn't have to be designed for the dry suit. So yeah, Converse, like Desert Army boots, basically. You need extra large fins to get them over the heavy sole, but it'll give you the support that you might want around your ankle.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm so glad, because that's one of the things I hate.
Because a lot of cavers that do sump diving, they wear things like that because they need the stability to do the dry caving, and they need something they can also go into the water with. So just usually 2 sizes up from your normal will fit over your dry suit socks and stuff, depending on how many, how thick they are. Yeah.
I'm definitely going to look into that right away.
Yeah, so skip the dive manufacturers, go outside. Yeah. Sorry.
This is why I have you on, so I can get all these extra tips on how to do this type of stuff.
But you were asking me another question and I diverted back. So sorry. Yeah.
When it comes to your stuff with I know that you do a lot of stuff on rebreathers, especially in cave diving. Now I know, talking to Hugh Bear, he says it's brutal diving in the caves on a rebreather. Can you tell me exactly what the challenge is and why it's so extra difficult when you're diving on a rebreather in a cave system?
Yeah. To begin with, probably no surprise to me, like rebreathers are a tool. Like, I know a lot of people say once you're on a rebreather, you just can't switch back and forth between it and open circuit. And I'm like, why not? Maybe it's because you just made a $12,000 investment, but no, like, it's a tool. And there's some environments where it's not easy to dive with. And those environments would generally be things that are shallow, and especially shallow overhead environments where you have to stick to a particular path so you don't damage the environment. Because we're all used to inhaling and rising up in open circuit, exhaling and dropping down. But on a rebreather, when you inhale and exhale, all you're doing is transferring gas between your lungs and a counter lung. And so you're not shifting your buoyancy at all. You're dead flat. And so rebreather divers, in order to control buoyancy, but also control their path, will often like swim around something rather than up and over, because as they go up, they've got to vent some gas. They go down, they've got to add some gas. And we're all like molecule misers on rebreathers. Yeah. So sometimes it's not a good tool. Like I remember an expedition in the Channel Islands off California, and the plan was to use our rebreathers for this deep cave exploration there, where we were doing some photogrammetry, and we had a lot of scientific gear to carry as well. But on the far side of the Channel Islands, you've got the entire force of the Pacific Ocean causing this unbelievable surge. So we were literally being like sucked into the cave and shot back out, literally like, 100 feet in and 100 feet out on a single surge of wave, but also like buoyancy shifts. And I was literally underwater barfing.
Oh, in a rebreather, or was
trying to close the loop, put the loop back in, open, and I swam back to the boat and just went no, and I took off the rebreather and went back to Sidemount, where it was a lot easier to control that. And barf. Yeah.
Okay, so for all the seasick people out there, at least even Joe gets seasick.
Yeah, sure. Everybody does at some point. Yeah.
So what would you say you've dove most of the planet, and that's not an exaggeration at all. So and more than a lot of other people, you have over 7,000 dive
Yeah, actually, I recently went over 8. So
You
yeah,
went over
yeah,
8.
yeah, yeah,
Whoa.
yeah.
How many dives do you do in a year generally?
Well, the last few years have been slower, but at least a couple hundred dives a year. Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
that's amazing. So, out of all the places that you've dove, because you've dove the Antarctica, I mean, you've been a pioneer explorer in all kinds of different cave systems with 3D mapping and doing all kinds of amazing stuff. What
hmm
would you say is your most crowning achievement as far as a dive from a perspective of how you had to prepare for it and
yeah.
what you did for it?
I think the dives I did during the Wakulla 2 project back in the late 90s were like huge for me, like really pivotal in my career. We were making the world's first three-dimensional maps of any underground space, and we were doing it on rebreathers. And in the late 90s, that was pretty fresh. So my longest dives on those missions were like 22 hours.
22 hours.
Yeah, yeah. So, um, huge dives, and it took me 2 years of training and preparation for those dives. And at the time, we didn't even have rebreather classes. Like when I got the Cislunar Mark V and asked Bill, who was going to teach me, he's like, well, we don't have a class. You'll figure it out. Yeah, so it was more like kind of crowdsourcing information from the few people that were in the game back then. But it was pivotal for me because up until that point, scientists didn't take cave divers very seriously. They kind of looked at us like adrenaline junkies out to get ourselves killed, and for some reason that was a bit valid. There were a lot more accidents, back then. And after that project, they realized like the scientific data that we could bring to people that would never have the capability of going to places where we were going. Suddenly we had a new relationship with the scientific community. And for me, that helped me to really pinpoint my way forward in a career.
That's amazing because I know that like when I started back in the 90s, tech diving was definitely on the fringe. I was actually just getting into doing a bit of decompression diving and
hmm
technical diving with doubles and stuff when I stopped diving.
Mm.
And I mean, back then, even nitrox was ooh,
Oh,
bad
I
stuff.
know. Voodoo gas. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
I
that's
was
what they called
actually
it.
just gonna say that.
Yeah. Yeah, for those that weren't around diving back then, there was the most popular dive magazine, Skin Diver Magazine. The entire issue was dedicated to why nitrox is a bad idea and why it's dangerous. And I don't know if you know the roots of why that issue came out, but uh, back then I was on the Cayman Island Water Sports Operators Association,
Yep.
and Cayman was the biggest dive destination in the world. We bought the most advertising in Skin Diver magazine. Like, the magazine was buoyed up by the Cayman Islands tourism industry. But there were some operators in Cayman that were just, turning around boats like crazy. And they were afraid that if people had nitrox, they wouldn't stay down longer. So if they stay down longer, maybe you don't get 4 turnovers a day. And so it was a bottom line kind of thing. Oh, we have to mix a different gas. We don't really understand this gas. And it may mean we put less people on the boats every day. Lower bottom line. So it was really interesting. But what turned the tide was that the one company in Cayman that had the most staff decompression illness hits, we decided to put the entire staff on nitrox for a year and see, how this could change things. And these people were diving, 4 dives a day, deep, shallow kind of thing. And after they got on nitrox, nobody got bent anymore. So doing the same profiles they'd been doing. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess that whole voodoo gas thing was a mistake. you know?
You know, I got certified in nitrox back in 1996,
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
by Dick Ratowski.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was he was actually I did a course with him and a couple of technical, there were I think 5 other instructor buddies of mine
Yeah.
at when they used to have the Underwater Canada show.
Yeah. Yeah.
we all took the course from Dick that year, and
Yeah.
we actually took a lot of heat from other instructors
I bet. Yeah.
about diving nitrox at the time. We
Yeah.
actually, the organization that I taught for, we all did, and we actually got pulled aside and we're like, hey, you guys can't be doing this, you know, blah 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 blah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was all very secretive back then, like, garage mixing and everything else. Yeah, but yeah, those early 90s when I was in Cayman, the operation I worked for had a waiver. The rest of the island had very strict, like, max depth and types of dives and everything. We had a waiver because we were on the wild side of the island and we're doing stuff a little bit deeper and a little bit different. And so I was like screaming for nitrox and tech diving, and we weren't even calling it tech diving back then. But yeah, it was a tough pill to swallow. But you look at Cayman today, and it's actually a great destination for recreational and technical diving. There's lots of support for people that are diving deeper or on rebreathers or whatever.
Yeah, which is awesome that they've enabled that. I mean,
Yeah.
I was shocked last year when I went to Cozumel, and when I signed up for the snorkeling trip, and I was looking at the board with who was diving nitrox and who was diving air, and there were literally out of like 4 boats, there were 2 or 3 divers out of the whole list that were not diving nitrox.
Yeah, isn't that something?
So yeah, it's awesome, and I definitely believe in the safety factor in it. I mean, anybody who's read enough stuff on it can and talks to people like you, you're probably about the best one experienced with doing more nitrox dives than anybody.
Yeah, I've done a few.